What's up, Goon the Spire Gamer? So Prydwen recently had a pretty major update with them notably adding decks and guides for every character, which I helped a lot with. So I thought with the introduction of Rita, I would explain changes to the site and kind of hold an AMA so people can give feedback and ask about what areas are confusing them. But first, let's look at what's new. Every character now has a complete Epiphany review and deck recommendation section. This is the section that I pretty much completely wrote, so if you saw my recent Rita review, I used pretty much the same system there for that. Clicking on a random character, let's say Cassius, we can see that all of our Epiphany options have a brief description describing when you might consider the Epiphany and ranking them. The criteria I used is 5 stars is the go-to Epiphany, pretty much always can take, and is never bad or by far the most popular option. 4 stars alternative to the go-to Epiphany, maybe slightly worse but completely acceptable in most builds. 3 stars situational or context dependent. There is a heavy asterisk here because the context in which a 3-star ranked Epiphany can be used affects how good it is, obviously. Like for Cassius's 3-star ranked Popeye is dependent on if you are fine with resetting constantly to get its ideal conditions, where it will be superior to alternative options. Obviously, most people aren't going to do that, so it isn't the go-to recommendation. But if those conditions are met, it will be superior to the 5-star option, and this is outlined in the description of the Epiphany review itself as well, right? 2 stars, basically fringe or niche builds. These builds often aren't that good. They're basically worse than other options, but they tend to be kind of popular, or people like playing them, so they're still mentioned there. 1 stars are not recommended for general content. Now, there is a heavy asterisk here, which is that for these rankings is assuming general use most content, because they often put really specific modifiers that can force extremely niche or flat out bad cards into the limelight for Great Rift specifically. These general content deck recommendations cannot account for these Great Rift modifiers in real time. For example, the current Great Rift is having people play Annoying 3 on Orlia specifically because there is a modifier which says you must play high cost attack cards, and Orlia has a high cost attack card that doesn't consume buffs. This card is not good for damage or its intended use, and in general is just a bad card that will lose you value by playing it because it's taking 3 AP. But it's seeing play because of an extremely specific scenario where they're pretty much forcing you to play it if you're playing Orlia. So do keep in mind that, like, I can't predict Season 5 Great Rift having some modifier that says you must do exactly 3 damage with a 1-cost card, change you a 0-cost card. That makes some previously underused Epiphany that's bad in every other scenario you play while I wrote these. Nor do I think it's right to rate Annoying 3 higher because they basically forced you to debuff yourself in order to get rid of this modifier on this boss. However, if this modifier on this boss was to return at some point, if we were to see this like multiple times, then I would feel comfortable moving it up. I highly doubt that we'll ever see this modifier again, though. It's extremely specific, basically only made for Rita, right? The purpose of this Epiphany review and deck review sections is also just to give an understanding of a character's baseline builds and how to play the character. So if you read through them and try out the generic builds yourselves, then you will get a baseline understanding of them and then be able to understand extremely niche things that pop up from specific content like Great Rift promoting them, because you will have a baseline understanding of the character, if that makes sense. The second major addition are deck recommendations and team synergies. Just checking out Orlia's, we can see 4 general decks here: OTK Leah, Malt Leah or Sacred Sensor Leah, Spore Leah, and 1 card Leah. In below brief descriptions talking about how the decks work. Some decks need more explanation than others. As you can see, OTK Leah describes how there is an ordering in which you play the cards, while other decks like Sacred Sense Malt Bluff deck, you just play all your Sacred Sensors and Softies back to back with nothing special. So there's no explanation really required there, and obviously when there's no explanation required, it'll be a shorter description. Another nice section is the gear section, which you can see has percentages here and says 5 turns for various partners and such. Basically, we did full comprehensive calculations of all the characters' best consistent damage teams in 5-turn scenarios for comparison's sake, with 100% representing the free-to-play options like Zatera for Rita. I could do an entire separate video just breaking all this down, but people don't care about a lot of the damage specifics, it seems, so the key takeaway should basically be that the percent here isn't just random, rather they are like very comprehensive comparisons based on top-end rotations for these characters that have been cross-referenced with multiple theory crafters' calculations, including my own. But I digress. There were also some changes to the tier list, with Great Rift being added as an entirely new tier list. This change was made because we realized that Great Rift was skewing things in a very confusing direction for people, so it made sense to separate it. For example, Rita is a unit who isn't particularly strong in any save data content outside of Great Rift. She's serviceable, but there's usually better options, while for Great Rift, she's basically one of the 3 DPS units who has any real chance of competing in rearguard, but this is only because they put a really specific modifier that was basically barring any unit besides Rita from even being used, or at least that was the intention. So it just isn't indicative of other units for Season 2 save data, such as distortion bosses. And again, to put it in another perspective, this Great Rift is basically multiplying all of Rita's damage by 2, while no other character besides Rita, unless you are using Rita as like a side unit, will be able to get that same multiplier. And on that note, Chaos tier list is still the same. If anyone has any questions about these, do let me know and I can explain the logic for the placements. In addition, only addition was Rita, who by all metrics performs very well in Chaos. I'd even see an argument for her to be tier 0 for Chaos. I've been kind of coping that the reasons a lot of her numbers are underwhelming is because she actually has a lot of potential in the roguelike game modes we've seen teased in the roadmap, but time will tell on that. Moving on to seasonal save data, there have been some changes. Haru, Luke, and Renoa all moved up 1 tier. The logic for Renoa and Luke was basically because outside of Great Rift, they're both great for current seasonal content that is mostly low turn controls, since they have access to Forgotten Grave, a neutral that gives hunters and rangers 100% crit rate, only for 1 turn, but since most content outside of Great Rift can be completed in 1 turn, they're great for it. Moreover, Luke specifically is the best Hugo driver right now, and Hugo can kind of backpack a lot of units into relevance. But combined with Luke specifically at max potential, he basically turns Luke's already high single target DPS even higher, with top potential Luke Hugo teams being stronger than top potential Malin teams in many cases. Haru, on the other hand, was one I've been arguing for a higher placement for a while, and we basically felt it was the right time to move her now, with her having a lot of play in last Great Rift's first half Vanguard, and people realizing Narja's main use as a Haru support, basically, with Narja also being tier 0.5 when her only meta team is Haru. It just didn't really make sense to have Haru in a lower tier when Narja is in that tier. Haru also just calcs and performs extremely well in his unit, who has basically never been hit by a negative modifier thus far. Like, Malin and Luke are constantly hit by elasticity, which caps their hit count at 7 for the rest card. And characters like Teferi and Mika are hit by necrosis, which stops you from spamming heal skills or also kill yourself. But Haru's team has dodged all of these modifiers, making her one of the strongest units for basically all content outside of Great Rift right now. She's great in tower, she's great versus the distortion bosses. There isn't like a single seasonal content where she's bad right now. I would even see an argument for her to be tier 0, honestly. And for Great Rift tier list, this one is kind of complicated and it has a lot to do with them. For lack of better phrasing, designing this Great Rift terribly. Like, this Great Rift just has some really weird design choices that I find unfun, and I think a lot of people find unfun. Basically, both Vanguard and Rearguard for this Great Rift promote the same units, which again was an odd choice. Usually you want to promote a different unit for one half than the other half, but both halves are pretty limiting for this one. They both want you to use high cost cards to break the boss's specific armor modifier, which a very limited number of characters can do naturally. Previous Great Rifts, we'd have ranked characters more with Vanguard and Rearguard being clearly separate characters, but this Great Rift is harder to do so because it's a lot of the same characters. But basically, characters currently heavily represented in the data just based on popularity is what is primarily being used for the characters. That being said, some characters currently underrepresented but have some potential are like Maribel on Vanguard, which I think is extremely slept on, and I would argue could be tier 0 if people actually played her. She's probably the easiest unit to clear on Vanguard right now because all her damage is fixed, and therefore she can completely ignore all of the boss's armor effects and its hit effect for her damage, but people just don't play her or have her built, so she's very underutilized, although she is on some of the Asian leaderboard. Also, characters like Renoa have seen some major play in the Great Rift, although it has been early and basically proves that any character can be used in this Great Rift to some success if you farm Flame Eternal, because the Renoa decks have double Flame Eternal. Flame Eternal being a very rare neutral Swamp card that raises all attack card costs by 1. This goes back to annoying 3 on Aaliyah, where you basically need to play high cost attacks, not for any reason related to damage or even the cards themselves. It's just simply you need to play a high cost attack to break the armor. Another example of a card being used for this reason is Mealtime on Narja. You are going out of your way to not even use Veracity on Narja. You're just using the 6 cost Mealtime in order to get rid of the boss's buff. So like if that doesn't explain how like annoying and restrictive the boss is, then I don't know what else will. However, this neutral is extremely hard to farm, referring to Flame Eternal. It only shows up at the very end of Swamp Zone and has a rare event that you can only get one of a run unless duplicated at the last boss. So it's just insanely annoying to farm. Some people have gone 30 plus runs without ever seeing it, and I've seen people flat out quit this Great Rift because of it being a meta defining card. That's just truly a terrible farming experience. And I'm someone who had no qualms farming chains in Season 1 meta, if you guys remember that meta. But if I'm not gonna farm Flame Eternal. It's like it's on another level. Yeah, so if you want to go through the pains of farming it, then technically most units could get decent scores by abusing it. That was all my point was to say. Raising card costs to get rid of boss armor faster is just the easiest way to push ranks, and it also buffs your cards. So with that being said, I think I covered all of the new changes to the Pryd side. Let me know if you have any questions regarding these. That's it. Toodles.